2 months into the Gaza war, America is still insisting Israel is killing too many Palestinians. But the administration is also under pressure itself, this time from an unprecedented number of its own officials and members of the Democratic Party, protesting at Mr. Biden's support for the war. Aaron David Miller is a former senior official at the State Department. He says the timing isn't good for the president.
If this were playing out in October of 2024, I think it would have a very significant impact on what promises to be a very close election.
Miller is now at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, with plenty of experience negotiating with Israel and the Palestinians. What does he think of Israel's tactics in battle, and what kind of country might emerge from this conflict? Aaron David Miller, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Well, Tim, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Israel risks strategic defeat if it goes on killing civilians at the current rate in Gaza. This last week from the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Was this as close to a public reprimand as Washington will go, or is the administration just virtue signaling for public consumption?
I think the administration, frankly, the rhetoric, increasing rhetoric, impatience, frustration with the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and the rising number of exponentially of Palestinian deaths, I think reflects that the bind that the Biden administration is in. On one hand, the administration from the get-go has tethered itself to Israel's war aims, which are very ambitious. Eradication of Hamas's military infrastructure above and below ground, freeing of the hostages, and the killing of at least of the two top leaders, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif, who planned the October 7 terror surge. But at the same time, they're under enormous pressure internally and externally. I think they have signaled to the Israelis privately on this issue, on the issue of time. Gallant, the Israelis want months. The administration, I'm told, privately has said to the Israelis, you have weeks. They are not prepared yet, I think, to say that publicly. No American president, and I've worked for half a dozen administrations, Republicans and Democrats, wants to fight with an Israeli prime minister. It's awkward, it's messy, it can be politically costly, and frankly, based on my experience, with some exceptions, and they're rare, it can be counterproductive. So based on who Joe Biden is and the butchery of October 7, I think it's going to take some effort still to move him to the point where these, I would term them, I don't think virtue signaling is the right word. I think they're cautionary advisories. They may even be warnings. But the real question is, a warning without a cost or consequence is just that. It's a warning.
And they keep warning, don't they? They keep warning. But has Israel stopped listening to the U.S.?
Well, stop listening. I think this is my analytical view. It's certainly not pretty and it's not comforting in terms of the exponential rise in Palestinian deaths and suffering. It is magical thinking to believe that in an area twice the size of the District of Columbia, with 2.3 million people, 2/3 of whom have been displaced at least once, maybe twice, with a population density of anywhere from 18,000 to 21,000 humans per square mile, that you can achieve Israel's military objectives, particularly Hamas's embedding in and around, under, on top of civilian facilities and populations, that you can achieve those objectives without doing catastrophic harm.
And that is priced in now, is it? That's catastrophic harm as far as Israel is concerned? They're going to keep pushing back against these warnings?
I think that the Israelis have made a judgment that in the wake of October 7 and the hostages, which is an issue, a dynamic that keeps on driving the anger, the resentment, the frustration on the part of not just this government, which is the most right-wing extremist in the history of the state of Israel, but on the part of the local, a part of Israelis generally. There's tremendous support for these war aims. October 7 was a degree of, I watched the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through two intifadas, through 4 or 5 Israeli-Hamas confrontations, through several Israeli-Lebanese wars where Palestinians were involved. That level of violence exceeds anything that we've ever witnessed in terms of its indiscriminate killing, its sadism, its brutality. And I think this is important and not fully appreciated. I'm just reporting here, so please don't shoot me. The contract between the governed and those who govern was fundamentally eroded on October 7th. The contract that most Israelis make with their government is a very simple one. We're prepared to agree to mandatory military service. We're prepared to put our sons and daughters in harm's way with the real possibility that they can be seriously injured or killed. But in exchange, you, the government, guarantee, to the extent it's humanly possible, our security and our normalcy.
Which it failed to do.
Which it has galactically failed to do. And I think that dynamic influences, I know the Israelis don't like the notion of the term vengeance and avenging, but I cannot believe if you are a member of the Israeli intelligence establishment. I'm interviewing next week both former head of Shin Bet and the former head of Mossad. If you are a member of the intelligence community or the Israeli military, the sense of guilt for what you failed to anticipate and operationally how you failed to respond for as many as 12 hours once the terror surge began, I think cannot help but affect, influence, and drive the determination of the Israelis. If you ask me, are they prioritizing the lives of their own soldiers over the lives of Palestinian civilians in Gaza? The last almost 2 months now. I think tomorrow is the second month. We're beginning the second month of this conflict. The answer is, of course, they are, like most militaries. And I mean, I've pressed American military experts, folks who actually been involved, David Petraeus in Fallujah and Mosul. Nobody has come up with an answer to the problem of how you do what the Israelis want to do without endangering the population. The answer is, I guess, the Israelis should not be doing what they're doing. But then you end up with a conundrum. I don't know how the Israelis operate.
Well, there is considerable backlash, and there is considerable backlash among political appointees. Last month, 500 political appointees of the Biden administration, representing around 40 government agencies, wrote to the president to protest at his support for Israel in the war. I wanted to ask you how rare it is that so many people were moved to object on a key foreign policy issue.
It's fascinating, Tim. I will say I worked at the Department of State for 25 years for half a dozen administrations, Republicans and Democrats. I was not in government during Vietnam. But I must say, I have never, ever seen the degree of internal turmoil. Remember, we don't have many resignations. We're not talking about a tsunami of protests that lead to resignations. It's another matter for a civil servant, certainly a political appointee, to consider resigning over principle. That takes a lot of courage to do. We're not seeing that. But we are seeing on the staff level, Congress, the White House, the Department of State, USAID, not to mention the public, pressure on that progressive Democrats are bringing, even mainstream Democrats are bringing. If this were playing out in October of 2024, I think it would have a very significant impact on what promises to be a very close election.
And it might still have that impact. I mean, we are only a year away from the presidential election.
Right, although, as you know, I have to remind myself sometimes, in American politics, that year is still an eternity. Any number of other issues are going to be higher on the minds of Republican and Democratic voters and independents, like the economy, for example. Well, the economy. So I'm not prepared to make a determinative. I just don't think we know, and that's a conclusion I think that people who follow American politics On the granular level, I do not. Would probably tell you as well that we just don't know. But if you freeze framed it right now, I can't imagine young American voters, Arab Americans, Michigan, critically important state, Dearborn, the anger, the frustration is, and it's not just directed against the Israelis. I mean, that often morphs into and evolves into much darker sorts of dimensions, like anti-Semitism. It's also anger at the administration, and this is what's moving, I think, at least the public mood on Israel's operation.
Mr. Miller, whatever the administration has or hasn't done to calm concerns in its own ranks about its Israel policy, there appears to be a huge gulf in the US and Israeli visions of the future. Just a few days ago, we had Kamala Harris, the vice president, directly addressing Israel's talk of creating a security buffer zone between Gaza and Israel. The US would not permit, she said, not permit the redrawing of the borders of Gaza. Is that just more tough talk, or is this now looking like an immovable red line for Washington?
Well, the administration has been clear in enumerating what I call the 4 or 5 no's related to post-conflict Gaza. Gaza will not be used as a platform to launch terror. There'll be no forced relocation of the population. There'll be no reduction in territory. Gaza and the West Bank constitute a sort of unit, a presumptive notion that a two-state solution, which is the administration's view of how this should all end, is still very current. I think there is a margin between the administration's notion of there should be no reduction of territory and Israel's intention. We don't know, not even Pithy, the oracle at Delphi, reading the best of Golden Trails, could tell you, Tim, right now, how this is going to end. But one thing is unmistakably clear to me. There'll be no mission accomplished sort of speech on the part of the Israeli Defense Forces, and then they're leaving Gaza. With no transitional mechanism to guarantee Hamas's resurgence, forget even resurgence, there will be residual Islamist and Hamas elements, I suspect, that will continue to operate and pose how fundamental a problem, I can't say, but the Israelis are not simply going to pull out. What they're going to do is to create, and they will try to assure the administration that this is simply a function of a transitional issue until some sort of mechanism can be worked out and maintained, whatever it is, whatever your magical thinking of the de jure is, an Arab deterrent force, hardly likely, an international force, a possibility. The U.S. has already said it's not contributed its own forces. Would Britain, France contribute forces?
So when Kamala Harris says we want to see a unified West Bank and Gaza under the Palestinian Authority, and Palestinian voices and aspirations must be at the center of this work, it's not going to happen, is it? At least as far as Israel is concerned.
Well, let's be clear. We haven't even talked about the impact of this on Israeli politics. The average length of an Israeli government since independence is 1.8 years. This December, Mr. Netanyahu's government, the most extreme right-wing supremacist, homophobic government in the history of the state of Israel, will reach its 1-year mark. I don't like making predictions. I don't think there is a mechanism right now to remove Benjamin Netanyahu. His own party does not have a history of devouring its own. And Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, the two extremist ministers, see Gaza, frankly, as a positive distraction for them to continue to carry out their policies of trying to annex the West Bank and everything but name only. But you cannot create a stable situation in Gaza, let alone link it to the pursuit of a meaningful negotiations on a two-state solution with this Israeli government. Full stop. There has to be a political reckoning. There will be in 1973, until October 6, 7 was the greatest intelligence failure in the history of the state. There was a state commission of inquiry. Its interim report was filed maybe 8 months after the war. It did not identify the Meir government, or Meir in particular, as having responsibility, but she was forced to resign under public pressure. It undermines, it drags credulity to the breaking point to believe that a year from now, Benjamin Netanyahu will still be heading this particular government. But there is, in that critical year, and this is why it's so important, between now and November of 2024, this is the period where the administration needs to have a policy toward what to do in Gaza and how to link it, how to tether it to the pursuit of a political horizon, serious political horizon based on two states. I know people said that two-state solution has gone the way of the dodo. I do not believe that. This crisis has demonstrated one thing with terrifying clarity to me, and that is there is absolutely no way Israelis and Palestinians are going to live happily ever after in one house, either in a one-state solution or a binational state. It makes no sense. They're going to have to separate through negotiations. That's the key, into something that approximates two states with borders, security, Jerusalem, refugees, end of conflict and all claims on the table, negotiated seriously. I would argue, if the U.S. is to be a forget honest broker, an effective mediator.
It's not seen as an honest broker among Palestinians at all, is it? And meanwhile, if Israel continues ignoring demands from the White House, isn't America going to start looking pretty weak on the international stage?
Well, when it comes to Israel, the gap between our words and our deeds have always been more or less Grand Canyon-like. I mean, there have been times, you're familiar with 1956, as am I. Eisenhower threatened sanctions if the Israelis did not withdraw from Sinai. They did. Ronald Reagan delayed delivery of F-16s over Israel's extension of administrative law over the Golan Heights.
So there are tools. There are tools that Washington can use.
Basis. My own view is that what they must do is set a frame, a public referential frame that puts the United States clearly, unequivocally, and publicly on the record as saying exactly what it believes needs to evolve. I don't think this is going to be an issue for a first-term Biden administration. We're going to be running out of time. But if the president is reelected, you could see a serious effort in the second term. You're going to need leadership. Israel is not capable right now of entering into any serious negotiation with this government. And the Palestinian Mahmoud Abbas, now in the 19th year of a 4-year term, with no credibility, canceled elections in 2021, also is not capable to making those sorts of decisions. So that's the problem.
In your view, to what extent does Washington have to distance itself from the more controversial methods that Israel is employing on the battlefield? I mean, for instance, where are you on the accusations that Israel has imposed collective punishments on the people of Gaza?
Well, I think the blockade, which was the first act that the Israelis took in the wake of the terror surge on October 7, could easily be interpreted as that. On the issues of distinction and proportionality, which are the two key legal concepts of international humanitarian law, I think there's no doubt. You'd have to be detached from reality to draw any other conclusion that these Israeli rules of engagement have expanded. How could they not? Even if you don't believe Hamas's Palestinian Ministry of Health stats. And by the way, I learned for the first time today that those figures include not just civilians, but combatants. There's no distinction made between the two. But even if you believe those are inflated significantly, that it's not 15,000, including 5,000 Hamas fighters that the Israelis claim they've killed. You're talking about an exponential rise in Palestinian deaths, which is extraordinary.
Do you think the Biden administration is afraid of criticizing Israel? You remember what happened to Jimmy Carter? He was pilloried mercilessly when he talked about criticism of the condition in the occupied territories, wasn't he?
Yeah, but Jimmy Carter was, and I had enormous respect for Carter in terms, there would have been no Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty without Jimmy Carter. But Joe Biden is not Jimmy Carter. Joe Biden is alone among American presidents, a guy who is preternaturally and has been throughout most of his career, all his career, staunchly pro-Israel. He considers himself literally part and parcel of the Israeli story, and he's dealt with every Israeli leader for decades. No, Joe Biden has second to none in terms of his support for Israel. The question is, can that support be used to have, not just to have the uncomfortable conversations, but at some point to basically say to Benjamin Netanyahu, enough.
Because it's harming America's reputation as well by standing close to an ally that is doing the things that Netanyahu is doing?
I think that's certainly the key consideration on the part of the Israelis. Whether or not this administration has reached the conclusion that my proposition, that it's magical thinking to believe that Israel can achieve its objectives without wreaking tremendous harm on the Palestinian population, whether that's now baked in, I don't know. I do think this, however, there would have been no hostage releases without Joe Biden. There would have been no humanitarian aid into Gaza without Joe Biden. There's no question about that.
And there isn't that much anyway, is there?
Well, we need more. And over the last 48 hours, again, my understanding, the administration, under enormous pressure from the administration, has agreed, even as their operational tempo picks up in the South, to increase the amount of humanitarian assistance. But no amount of humanitarian assistance that is being allowed in could even begin to deal with the humanitarian catastrophe that's occurring, and winter is coming. And I don't know how to reconcile these two things, Jim. I mean, I really don't. I don't know if I were a part of this administration, I'm not sure what I would advise and whether or not that advice would be taken seriously, because I do not see, and I think this is part of the problem, why the administration lacks leverage. It cannot offer to the Israelis a compelling alternative to how to accomplish its war aims, to which, and Joe Biden has endorsed those war aims. That October 10th speech, which set the stage, swift, comprehensive, and decisive. I think those were the three words that the president used to say that's how America would approach this problem if what happened to Israel on October 7th had happened to the United States. Swift, comprehensive, and decisive. I don't have an answer for this. I readily admit it. Maybe I'm not smart enough. I just don't see how you do this. That means that at some point the administration may say enough. I don't know how long it would take the Israelis to accomplish their objectives, or if in fact they can accomplish them at all.
What kind of Israel do you think is going to emerge from this war? We're seeing continued violence by settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank. No move to halt that, despite Biden's warning that it must stop. There are also reports of arrests, job losses, and interrogations for those who dissent from the war. What kind of country, very briefly, do you think Israel is becoming?
Becoming. The judicial overhaul. The only good news about this parade of horrors is the fact that the judicial overhaul is dead. That Benjamin Netanyahu and his extremist ministers' efforts to rearrange the political furniture in Israel and to basically make majority rule with no protection of minorities, the order of the day has failed. And those 41 weeks have convinced me. I do not know another country. Certainly it would not happen here, despite our democratic system. For 40 plus weeks, hundreds of thousands of Israelis are in the streets pushing for the kind of Israel that they want, a humanist, liberal, democratic Israel. Admittedly, the occupation figures prominently and presents all kinds of contradiction to that image. But I think the majority of people in that small country, almost 10 million people, 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel, want that kind of vision for their country. And I am persuaded that this crisis, even though many military crises have led to even a further right-wing drift, I think you're going to get out of this eventually. It is not going to be a left of center government, Tim. It'll be a rightist government. Will it be center right? Will it be responsible? Will it be willing to face the reality that there could be no real security without a diplomatic, political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and end to the Israeli occupation? I would like to think that is the case.
Aaron David Miller, we could go on for much longer, but we've run out of time. Thank you so much for being on the program. Good to see you.
Tim, you too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.